Now, if Steve Currie would step up to introduce our next speaker.
All right, thanks, Melissa. I think it says something about the commitment of Michigan commissioners that I can say our next speaker is a familiar face to us. Matt Chase has been executive director of the National Association of Counties since September of 2012. Such a role comes with huge demands on his time, so we here at MAC are most appreciative that Matt can join us so often at our events. This morning, he's going to talk about what's happening on Capitol Hill and at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and what it means for delivering county services. So Matt, why don't you come on up? Yeah.
Well, good morning. You don't want to sit near me?
Well, it's close enough.
Oh, we were buddies. Well,
All right. Good morning, Matt. Thanks for joining us. You know, a lot of changes in Lansing right now, or not Lansing, but the federal government right now. But why don't you talk a little bit first about intergovernmental affairs? You know, Dina just talked a lot about Lansing. Tell us a little about what does intergovernmental affairs mean at the federal level?
Well, great. Well, good morning, all. And it's great to be here representing the National Association of Counties and my good friend Steve here. So let's dig right into it on intergovernmental affairs and why is it important to frame this morning's conversation around intergovernmental affairs. In Washington, it's really important to note that state and local official groups, the governors, the state legislators, the city officials and the county officials, and even the tribal officials, we are not a special interest group. We are a part of what's called the intergovernmental affairs system. So here in Michigan, Steve, you and your team may have to register as lobbyists, but at the federal level, the National Association of Counties staff and our other sibling groups that I just mentioned, we don't register as lobbyists. The White House and every federal agency has a dedicated office called the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, which many of you have probably worked with the White House or different agencies, that are assigned to work with the general purpose state and local government officials. And we bring it up because when groups like MAC or NACO take advocacy positions, so many people want to put us on a political spectrum. They want to say we're liberal or conservative or this or that. And we always say no. We're representing county governments as institutions and how federal policy impacts county governments in either your mandated roles and functions under your state constitution or state law or under federal law. And so once we frame our policy positions, people then start to say, oh, it's more about self-interest or the division of power and roles and responsibilities between federal, state, local, and tribal. And that's where we sit. And so as we talk about the different issues that we're working on today, just remember that lens. And for NACO, all of our policy positions come from the members. Our staff, we don't touch our policy positions. We have 1,400 county officials that sit on 10 committees that debate, recommend, and pass our policy positions.
Yeah, and that's similar to how we operate here in Lansing. You know, our goal, and our staff says this, and I said this to our board actually yesterday at our board meeting, our goal is to ensure local control, right? So that things can be done at the local level that want to be done at the local level, and I think it's similar for you guys at NACO, right?
Yeah, our joke is the political party that supports local control at the federal and state level is typically the minority party. So really, we're seeing that right now. So we can get into some of the specific issues.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about some of your federal policy issues, and you know, let's talk about all of them. No, I'm just kidding. Let's highlight some of the ones that you guys are working on right now.
So, you know, whether it's members, family, friends, they're like, what's it like in DC right now? And I say, every day is a dog year, and every day is an episode. So the White House has come out what they call flood the zone strategy, where everything literally is on the table. Nothing is sacred. Every agency, every policy, every program is being vetted and looked at, which can be a healthy thing. And what we're trying to do is make sure we have a seat at the table. So when we look at our priorities, it's really hard to prioritize because literally there's something going on at every single federal agency. So we'll work through these, but I'll start at a high level and just talk about maybe 3 or 4 key buckets, and then we can drill down. Number one would be the executive orders. So second most executive orders by a president in the first 100 days since Franklin Delano Roosevelt in his first term. And so there's a huge volume. In there for counties, there's a couple of really key executive orders. The first one was around the federal funding freeze. And that one is what I said was like a wait and see attitude. That was a new president comes in, even though it's really his second term, and says, we're going to pause all the funding, we're going to look at the grants, and we're going to look at does the funding match our priorities. A lot of folks freaked out. And our view was this is kind of natural, but this administration's being more aggressive on certain things than others. But let's let it play out. So some of the money was frozen because a cabinet agency didn't have a Senate-confirmed secretary. Some didn't have undersecretaries, assistant secretaries, and some still don't. Some was more political philosophy, where the executive order said if the federal funding touched diversity, equity, inclusion, something called Justice 40 or community benefit agreements, they were either going to eliminate the funding or ask grantees to rewrite their grants. And then there's a third bucket within there, which was the administration just didn't like what this money was funding, and they were going to try and do what we call impoundment, which there's going to be a lot of court arguments whether an executive branch can actually withhold money that Congress legally appropriated. And so you're seeing a ton of court cases on all of this, and the court cases change every day with appeals, different circuit courts and district courts. And so there's a lot of confusion there. Our advice to counties are, if you have a grant that's frozen or in jeopardy, talk to your federal funding agency. If you're really in a pinch, talk to your members of Congress, and certainly let NACO know so that we can work our relationships to find out what is going on. Most of the funding has been freed up, but again, if it related to certain types of clean energy, if it related to diversity, equity, inclusion, these community benefit agreements, it might have been withheld. Now, in certain spaces, we are starting to see the administration get more aggressive in clawing back money that a county or a city or a state had a legal contract, they were working, and they were told to cease working. And we're seeing that more now in the public health space, where CDC has clawed back about $13 billion from states, cities, and counties. And so there'll be court action on that. And what we've asked the administration is, give us some time to adjust. Like literally these letters come in and they say, today is your last day of spending money, shut it off. And you have a lot of staff, you have a lot of partners. And so we're saying, look, you may retain the right to do that, but can we have a 30-day transition? Can we do something like that? So I'll pause there and we can come back, but there's a lot more executive orders. And I should probably touch on immigration and ICE as well. Okay. So just mentioning the word immigration, people are going to already have their views. And on immigration, NACO's role is to protect counties and your liability. So there is this issue around ICE, immigration enforcement, and what we call detainers. And the administration has been very aggressive to say, if you are a sanctuary jurisdiction that doesn't cooperate with ICE, we're going to withhold your federal funding, especially from the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. This is really important for county commissioners and county attorneys to understand what we're talking about. In immigration, there's two main programs that touch county governments. One is called 287G, which is where you can voluntarily, as a county, especially through your sheriff's department, go through a training program and become deputized to basically be an extension of federal immigration officers to work with ICE and other federal agencies on immigration issues. That's voluntary, and there are dozens of counties that have done that, especially through the sheriff's department. The second one, which the news has covered so poorly, is the ICE detainer request issue. And what's important to know about ICE detainer requests is the vast majority of immigration violations are civil. They're not criminal. They're civil. There are a few immigration violations that are criminal, and they typically, if ICE comes to you and asks to detain someone, it will be a court order. The vast majority of ICE detainer requests, and where counties are getting in serious trouble, is an ICE detainer request is a voluntary request for the county to hold somebody in your jail up to 48 hours after they would otherwise be released by the courts. So when an ICE agent shows up and gives you a detainer request, ICE holds no liability. It is not an order of the court signed by a judge or a clerk, and it is a voluntary request. So we have had counties that have said, well, we'll honor the detainer request, and then the ACLU shows up and starts suing you. And if you're in Suffolk County, New York, you're now paying out $60 million in damages for honoring these, basically the equivalent of an affidavit. So that's where we're saying to our members, look, it's up to you if you want to partner with ICE on 287G or any other part of the detention side, but just understand your liabilities. You can tell ICE when you're going to release people and not be in trouble, but if you're holding people past the time when the court would otherwise release them, you better watch out, unless you have a state law that provides some immunity for the county. So that's where your insurance companies, your insurance pools, and you as commissioners got to watch out on the liability. And so that's our job as intergovernmental partners, is to get beyond the media, get beyond the noise, get beyond the partisan rhetoric, and get into the practical reality of these issues and what counties as institutions have to deal with.
Yeah, that's a good point, Matt. Let's going back to the funding side of things. I know there's been some updates from Treasury on the ARPA funds specifically, and what's going on with obligation versus actually physically paying out the funds. You want to touch on that a little bit, because there is some updates even this week, some webinars that are going to be held by Treasury.
Yeah, so what we're talking about here is the American Rescue Plan provided close to $65 billion for counties. I think Michigan counties, you all got about $1.9 billion in direct federal aid from Treasury. And you had to obligate the money by December 31st, 2024. And you have to perform all of the work by December 31st, 2026. So what Treasury is looking at now is have all the counties submitted their either annual or quarterly reports. If you're a larger county, you're reporting more often. If you're more mid-sized to rural, you're reporting annually. And what they're looking at is, has the county board obligated all the money? What's obligated? That means you've signed your contracts, you've approved the budgets through the commission, that you have accounted for every penny. And now you have till the end of 2026 to actually do all the work. So on that December 31st, 2026, we call that like pencils down. No more work, no more hammering a nail, no more paving, no more putting a water line, you're done. And whatever's left at that point will have to be returned. Right now, Treasury is saying they're going to start doing more desk audits about, have all the counties truly obligated the money that they said they have? So I'll call this like tidying up your paperwork to make sure that you followed their process. And I think in Michigan, at least from our reports from Treasury, you're in good shape. And so, good job.
Let's talk one more policy issue I want to touch on before we change gears into a different area is the Medicaid 1115 waiver process. I'm looking at my friend Matt Saxton over there as the executive director of the Sheriff's Association and a county commissioner. We've worked closely with that group to help advise Michigan Department of Health and Human Services on that waiver process. Can you talk about what that process is at the federal level, how it works, how many states maybe have been approved for that, the different types of waivers that have been approved? Because it is a huge issue where counties are paying significant healthcare costs or can be liable for significant healthcare costs in their jails if they have a medical issue.
All right, Steve, I'm going to take your question, and I'm going to do what a politician in Washington would do, and I'm going to expand it into what I want to talk about.
Perfect.
But I am going to talk about 1115 waiver. So 1115 waiver is a fancy word of saying there's Medicaid law, and then there's the ability for states to petition the federal government for pilots and innovation to do things that they otherwise wouldn't maybe be allowed to do. And the 1115 waiver has been really important for us, states like Michigan, to try and get at this issue of why, for decades, have we stopped federal benefits for people at arrest, not post-adjudication. So that's Medicaid, Medicare, Juvenile for CHIPS program, which is a health care for juveniles, and for VA benefits. That at arrest, they either terminate or suspend your federal benefits. And what we have been saying is we're fine if it's post-adjudication. Someone's had due process, they've gone through the courts, they've either been found guilty or they plead out, then that is on the county responsibility to provide the health care in the jail. But if you are pre-trial, why are you losing your entitlement to public benefits until you've had due process? This has been viewed as, by the feds, as, well, if counties are already paying for jail health care costs, why should we bail you out? And our argument has been, you can't cherry pick the Constitution. You can't pick, well, I don't want to follow the Fourth Amendment on this one, you guys pay. And so we've been really fighting this more on constitutional grounds that, again, if you're pre-trial, you should retain your eligibility for federal programs. If you're convicted, then we'll have to work with the states on that health care cost. What the 1115 waiver has done for a couple of states, including Michigan, is to say, really what we're getting is poor outcomes. And this is what we're trying to tell the federal government, that the vast majority of folks in our county jails typically have behavioral health issues. 60 to 70% have mental health, substance abuse, or co-occurring. And often with those behavioral health issues come chronic health conditions. And so what we're doing is we're bringing people on and off treatment, especially for behavioral health, and we would like more continuity. And so we would like people to stay on their insurance, and we would like for them to stay in treatment more consistently because these folks are coming back to the community. And if we really truly partner, we could focus on federal, state, and local all saving money and getting better outcomes for our residents. But right now, we're pulling people off, they go off their medication. Some of these behavioral health medications, mental health medications take time to kick back in. And so the 1115 waiver basically said 30 days prior to release. I don't know your waiver specifically, but typically it's prisons and jails. Then Medicaid can kick back in, and you can start getting these folks back on their treatment prior to release back into the community. Because evidence shows that most folks, when they're released, the first thing they do when they get out is not go to their doctor and say, hey, I need to get back into treatment. So that's what we're trying to work on. And again, very practical of federal, state, and local are all spending too much money on this. How can we work together and collaborate and figure out a better path forward? So Medicaid is really one of the top issues being discussed in DC right now. And so I'll go on a little riff if I can. So the president is meeting with the House Republican caucus actually today on a bill that's called reconciliation. Reconciliation is just a fancy word for a bill that doesn't require 60 votes in the US Senate to pass. A bill can pass in the US Senate on a simple 51 simple majority in the Senate and basically can't be filibustered. But it also has these arcane budget rules of how a reconciliation bill impacts debt and deficits. So how many of you have heard about the House and Senate budget fight right now? Okay, not enough hands. And the ones that did kind of had the alligator arms. This bill is 4 times the size of the American Rescue Plan. and 3 times the size of the 2017 tax bill. And yet most folks don't know what's going on. This bill, as proposed in the House and Senate, will increase our federal debt and deficits the most in really U.S. history. And so for counties, we have a lot at stake because we've got threats on our tax side and we've got threats on our federal revenue spending side. And I'm going to channel Stan Ponstein right now. Where's Stan? I can't see him, but I know he's here. I can feel his presence. Commissioner Ponstein, I feel your presence, who sits on our board and is a great advocate for Michigan counties, along with your President, Melissa Dobb. So if Congress was working on a budget to reduce our debt and deficits, I think our board would say, counties need to pay we need to play our part in lowering federal debt and deficits. They're getting out of control, they're $37 trillion. The challenge with this bill for us is they're actually going to increase debt, but cut federal spending. And how they're looking to do it is extend the 2017 tax bill, which you got to remember, in 2017 when they passed the Trump tax cuts is what they call them, they made the corporate tax provisions permanent and they made the individual tax breaks temporary. Now, why did they do that? Because they know corporate tax cuts are less popular than individual and small business tax cuts, so they knew they could come back and have political support to extend those later on. So this is where we're at. To extend the individual and small business tax breaks, they need about $4 trillion. To add on President Trump's favored additional tax breaks, no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, don't tax auto loan interest payments, and do a couple of other things, you're looking at another $2 to $3 trillion in deficits, in debt over 10 years. So to do that, they're saying we need to find some pay-fors. One of the pay-fors that they're looking at is to get rid of or cut back tax-exempt municipal bonds. So what are tax-exempt municipal bonds? That's probably how you funded your hospital, your schools, your courthouse, your jail, maybe large bridges, your airport, transit improvements, right? Tax-exempt municipal bonds fund about $4 trillion in infrastructure every 10 years. So why would the federal government want to get rid of tax-exempt municipal bonds? Simple. It would generate about $360 billion in new federal revenue. So our challenge has been, one, the federal government historically does not play a role in tax-exempt municipal bonds. We predate the 1913 tax code. Muni bonds go back to the beginning of our country. They were really used in the Civil War. And historically, the federal government has never received any revenue from municipal bonds because they predated the tax code and they were a market-driven, voter-approved, for the most part, local process. And people will say, there's no way Congress will go after these. Well, in the last tax bill, they took away our ability to refinance municipal bonds. And now you have to jump through all these hoops to refinance. And we said to Congress, this is crazy. That's like a homeowner buying a house and being told you have to lock in for your interest rate at 30 years and you can never refinance if the market has lower interest rates. But they did that to us. And so this time, they're looking to go after private activity bonds and state and local education municipal bonds simply for the revenue. There's no philosophical argument. I mean, how can conservatives go after a market-driven, voter-approved, locally controlled process? They can't, philosophically. It's just pure revenue grab. So that's one. And then two is Medicaid. So the House bill has instructed the Energy and Commerce Committee to find $860 billion in savings through Medicaid. And so where that impacts counties is, of course, we own 1,000 hospitals across the country, have 700 long-term nursing facilities, and Michigan being really the one state where you've been able to really keep your long-term care or skilled nursing facilities. And so for us, what we've said is we understand that Medicaid has really grown. We understand that we need to figure out how to scale it back. But where is the discussion on those that are on Medicaid that are going to be moved off the rolls? How are they going to get private insurance? There's no discussion on that. And so 25% of the US population is now on Medicaid. 25% are on Medicaid. The traditional group that's on Medicaid are elderly, disabled, and children. 40%, 4 out of every 10 kid in this country is on Medicaid. 40% of our kids. So for NACO, this isn't like a liberal versus conservative. This is self-interest, that we want to keep our public hospitals open. We want to be able to keep our senior centers, our elderly long-term care facilities open. And more importantly, we don't want our indigent care budgets to explode again pre-Affordable Care Act. And so what we're saying to them is, we understand the federal government can't sustain this, but where is the conversation about getting private insurance for those individuals that could qualify and could afford it? And where is the private sector in this? And then how can federal, state, and local work together to figure out how do we deal with the remaining populations? But simply just shutting it off without a transition will be hard for us. And so for Medicaid, there's a couple of things just to be aware of, and I'll do this in 60 seconds. One is the expansion population. So a state like Michigan that expanded, you get a 90% federal share typically, and it goes down over time. One of the things they're looking at is putting that to your state's normal, what they call FMAP, or your normal federal rate. So that's a 65-35 split in Michigan. So the state would have to decide, do we get out of the expansion population, which are primarily single males, primarily, and just let those folks get off the rolls, or does the state backfill it with state money? So that matters to counties, because if the state decides to backfill the federal money with general funds or a provider tax, that's less money they have for your other aid. The second piece is they're going to look at what's called provider taxes, where states charge providers, hospitals, and doctors a tax, and then basically what they've been doing is reimbursing that tax through higher Medicaid reimbursement. And that is a problem, and they're called intergovernmental transfers. For us, out of self-interest, again, if they reduce the provider tax from 6% to 3% or eliminate it, the state will have to backfill that lost tax revenue with general funds. And that's the challenge that states are having. And that's where, as counties, our self-interest is, we want as many people on insurance besides indigent care. And so we would prefer a cost share with Medicaid than counties picking up 100% of the tab. So we can talk more during Q&A if we get to that.
Yeah, and then just a reminder, if you do have questions, write them down on those cards, and we'll come around and collect them here in a little bit. You talked a little bit about reconciliation. Let's talk a little bit about that process right now and where the budget is, and maybe crystal ball it a little bit. What do you think? What are we going to see here in the next few weeks, months, whatever?
I'll tell you what, when you talk to particularly your Republican members in your House delegation, they've got more pressure on them than I can ever imagine. I mean, the amount of pressure that the president and the White House are going to put on House Republicans on this bill is going to be enormous. And the reason is there's only a 3-seat majority in the House, so they can't have a lot of defections. The Senate has a little bit more wiggle room with a 3-seat majority. But that's why the president's meeting with the House Republican caucus today. The needle they're trying to thread is you've got some in the caucus, in the House Republican caucus, who take Central Valley of California. There's a couple of congressional districts where 50 to 60% of the population's on Medicaid in a congressional district. So how is that member of Congress going to vote to cut? And when we say cut, we're talking about the level of your state correction budget or your state K through 12 budget is how much they're talking about cutting from your Medicaid budget for states. So we're not talking just trimming it. We're talking like the state's going to have to come up with massive resources. And so you've got a number of vulnerable House Republicans who are saying there's no way we can vote for these cuts. On the flip side, you've got members of the House Freedom Caucus saying, wait a minute, we're not going to add $3 to $8 trillion to the debt. We want these offset. And so that's the challenge that the President and the Speaker of the House are having, is navigating those that don't like the explosion in the debt and those that are saying if we cut too much, it's really going to harm our district. So in addition to Medicaid, the other program that's also on the serious chopping block would be the SNAP program, the nutrition program out of the U.S. Department of Ag, where the House wants to cut about $230 billion in nutrition. And so when you start looking at the math, people think those are urban programs, but they're really going to poor rural districts just as much as they are urban districts. The Senate is trying something never seen before in congressional history. The Senate is trying to change the budget rules to say the cost of extending the 2017 tax cuts should be zero. They want to do what they call current policy. The Congressional Budget Office is saying, wait a minute, that's not how we've done it. That's not how we've ever done it. The cost to extend the 2017 tax cuts are $4 trillion. So the Senate budget that passed last week said, no, we're rewriting the budget rules. The $4 billion doesn't count, that's zero, and then we're going to add another $1.5 billion in new tax breaks on top of it.
They're saying that because that's already been cut, so it's out of the math problem at that point, is what they're saying, right?
That's right. That's like saying I took a vacation last week and I spent $1,000 on vacation. I normally spend $100, but I'm going to keep spending $1,000 every week like I'm on vacation, even though I'm back at home. Like that it's going to fundamentally change how Congress does its budget scoring. And the Democrats have said, if you use those rules, we'll use them too. So be careful. And so it's an interesting time. And by the way, I haven't even gotten to the plan to get rid of FEMA by September and get rid of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Haven't got to the executive orders on elections and some of the new requirements that will be on counties. Like the list will go on and on and on.
Yeah. Well, FEMA's one that typically Michigan doesn't deal a lot with a lot of natural disasters, with the exception of recently, and we're thinking of our northern counties right now who just had a massive ice storm up north in Charlevoix County, Sheboygan County.
By the way, when you invited me to this, you said it would be 75 and sunny.
Yeah. It was one day a few weeks ago.
And I got off the plane yesterday, and my app said, feels like 17. I was like, that's reversed. He said 71.
But you should be thankful for that the sun is shining. That's typically that thing we don't see much of, but I apologize for that. You know, we do our best.
I grew up in upstate New York, closer to Montreal than
so you're
New York
used
City,
to it.
so I'm used to it.
One thing we get a lot of questions about at our association with the new Trump administration is, if you remember, the previous Trump administration did county days, yes, or state days, or whatever state county days in D.C., where they did a really nice job of inviting county folks from across the country to come speak to the White House, have a full day of engagement with leaders of the White House. Can we expect those again, yes, this administration?
Yes. At our legislative conference a couple of weeks ago, the White House Director of Intergovernmental Affairs did announce that they are returning, and so I can say that publicly. And we are working with them on the logistics. And you know, one thing that you need to tell them is their first state is Ohio.
It's bad.
So
bad look.
I think Michigan, your first talking point might be like, really, you're going to start with Ohio? But they are a great opportunity. So in the first Trump administration, they brought through over 5,000 county commissioners and county officials for a day at the White House, state by state. We partner with them on it. We're going to partner with them again. And we just think it's a great opportunity for you to, one, meet the federal officials, but also bring your message of whatever is important to your county, whether it's a Corps of Engineer project, whether it's public health, whatever it is that your county cares about. and really educate federal officials on the challenges at the local level. And so they are going to start in May. One of the things that we're working on is the White House literally doesn't have a room big enough to host it right now. They had an auditorium and it got converted into a studio with all the virtual stuff going on, and now they don't have a room big enough. Like, I said to them, like, build a tent, do something, but we'll find a room big enough to host.
So we can expect those invites starting in May, and at some point in time, Michigan will be invited.
Yes.
Good to hear. Good to hear. If you have any questions, go ahead and start.
By the way, I think they picked Ohio because there's a vice president.
Yeah, I know.
Ohio.
I figured that.
They also have a special election in the U.S. Senate there. So.
Yeah. It makes sense. It makes sense. As we start getting questions being brought up, what about outside of policy and federal issues are NACO working on? What are some other partnerships that they're working on?
So listening to Dina, looking at your materials, it always makes me feel good that we're on the right page, where the issues that you're focused on are the same issues that we're focused on. The opioid settlement dollars, where Amy and your team and our staff have been working hand to hand on how do we educate local officials about the settlement, where is the settlement, and what are the eligible uses of those dollars, is one. Two, we're launching an energy academy where we're really trying to work with county officials to educate everybody about where's our nation's energy headed and what are the impacts on county tax revenue and your land use in your state. I think your towns maybe have more land use sometimes.
Yeah, we have about 20 counties that do zoning here, but so it is mostly the townships and cities, yes.
And so we just brought a group this week actually out to Utah to look at what's happening with geothermal. We brought a group down to Oak Ridge National Labs in Tennessee to look at what's happening with these small modular nuclear. And what's really driving the energy, as you all know, is Gen AI and the next evolutions of artificial intelligence. Just think of this. If you do a Google search versus a ChatGPT search, the ChatGPT search takes 10 times the amount of energy as a simple Google search. And now regular searches like Google are embedding AI into it. And so you see this explosion of the need of energy. Where I live in Northern Virginia, 95% of the world's internet traffic goes through Loudoun County out near Dulles Airport. And you look at the data centers that have exploded out there, and you're now starting to see them pop up in all these states. And we warned the previous administration, we talked to this administration about it, that we're losing county commissioners every election over these issues, that they put you in a really tough spot on land use. And so we're trying to develop an energy academy around that to really educate locals on, not to be for or against it, just understand the economics of the industry, understand the incentives of behavior for the people you're negotiating across the table, and look at what is your community going to need to compete in the modern era. And that energy also ties back to broadband, because if your community doesn't have high-speed internet, you're not going to be able to use Gen AI. You need high-speed internet to be able to use artificial intelligence or Gen AI tools. And so those two are going to come together. Looks like
we got some questions.
Bob's got some questions.
We do have 2 questions so far. Oh, here comes another one. Okay. First question.
Is it from Stan?
No, it is not. So with such motivation to make cuts in federal funding, why has defense spending not been discussed? It seems to be the only third rail not discussed.
Defense spending?
Defense spending. Cutting everywhere else except defense spending.
So if the question's why isn't defense spending on, right now, the House budget resolution doesn't really deal with defense, but the Senate actually increases defense by about $150 billion. So I think with the state of the world, they're not looking to cut defense right now, but that's out of my lane, so I'll I won't give my personal opinion on that one.
Steve, do you have anything to add?
What's that?
Do you have anything to add,
I don't
Steve?
know. No, it's way out of my wheelhouse if it's out of his.
All right, next question. Michigan is home to 83 of the most beautifully diverse counties in America. How does or will MAC or NACO advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I can't hear very well.
Do you want me to
So
speak louder?
Michigan is home.
Oh.
Michigan is home to 83 diverse, beautiful counties. 83 diverse, beautiful counties. How will MAC or NACO advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion going forward?
Okay. Going back to what you said, Steve, about local control, where we really feel like counties should reflect their community and control your policies and really advocate for what you feel is really important to your communities. And so our challenge has been, when it comes back to federal policy, is we're going to follow the Constitution and we're going to follow the law. And it's really difficult when the federal government starts telling us what we can do and what we can't do. From a legal perspective, where this White House is going to lose its court cases, is you can't coerce, as Justice Roberts said, you can't put, quote, a gun to the head of a state and local government to force them to do something that they don't want to do. And so if counties want to pursue DEI, that's your right. You are locally elected officials, and we're going to continue to support local control on these things.
Yeah, and that goes back to what I said earlier. Our number one job is to maintain local control, maintain funding at the local level so that you guys can implement the things that you want to implement at your county. It's not our job at MAC to tell you what to do there. We're going to follow the law, Constitution as well, but maintaining local control is that job, and 90% of that time is maintaining funding coming to the counties from the state.
Next question. With all of the proposed cuts, what is the money or the savings for?
With all the proposed cuts, what are the savings for?
Yeah.
It's to offset tax breaks. So again, both the House and the Senate are going to most likely pass larger tax breaks for corporations and individuals on both sides of the tax ledger. And they're going to try and offset some of those with spending cuts. But as I mentioned, the spending cuts aren't going to be enough. So they're still going to need another $4 to $6 trillion in debt to offset those spending, tax cuts. So the spending side is really, 20, 30% of those tax breaks.
So do you anticipate,
And by the way, that's
People-
only this reconciliation process. The president's budget will come out for next fiscal year through the traditional appropriations process, and we should anticipate additional cuts. Things like FEMA, HUD Community Development Block Grants, the home program, transportation, all the other traditional discretionary programs, that will be a separate process. So the cuts that I was talking about previously are through this reconciliation process are just what we call mandatory programs. That's where Medicaid, SNAP, TANF, which is more the welfare programs, social service block grants, that's where they reside, is more on the mandatory side. And so you're going to see those cut most likely now. And then in the fall, we'll have conversations about additional cuts on what we call the discretionary side of the budget.
so do you anticipate those cuts coming back to the regular person in the form of a check or reduced taxes?
Well, maybe reduce taxes, but again, most of this money is to extend existing tax law. And for individuals, the primary tax break was when they increased what's called the standard deduction. So rather than deducting, your property tax, your sales tax, charitable giving, everybody got a standard deduction that covered most Americans, except for truly the wealthy. And so that goes to extend that. If the president has his way, he would also take away taxing of tips, not for everybody, it would be very targeted. Maybe no longer taxing Social Security as income, maybe not taxing the interest on auto loans, and a couple of other things. But otherwise, it's really existing policy.
Okay. Okay, just one quick note. Someone did send up a note about the temperature in the room. I guess a lot of people are cold, so, okay, Antoinette's on that.
So just-
We'll look into it. But, okay, Steve's gonna wrap it up now.
All right, well, Matt wants to say a few words, and then I'll get into some logistics. So Matt, go ahead and
Yeah,
close
just
things
keep it
out
on
for us.
time. Just thank you all. And what we want to do is be an honest broker and represent counties. What we need is to hear from you. What are your priorities? Where are changes that the administration making helping you? Where are they harming you? As I said earlier, there are so many. We could have gone agency by agency. If we were talking EPA, there's changes to the Waters of the U.S. regulation that deals with your roads, your culverts, and those kind of things. Elections, there will be new requirements around proving U.S. citizenship in federal elections. So for counties and your towns and your locals that run elections, when it comes to the federal side, you're going to have to, as people register to vote, they're going to have to prove that they're a U.S. citizen now. And so some states already do that. There'll be requirements for paper audit trails. Most states do that now. But let us know what you're interested in, and we can walk you through some of the changes. And what our job is right now is to really crowdsource your concerns, your optimism, and see how we can help you.
Well, thank you, Matt. We appreciate your time today. Please accept a small gift of a donation from our MAC Service Corp in your name to Fair Michigan, an advocacy and outreach group dedicated to civil rights. We are now headed into our first networking break with our premier partners. Another change in format this year, the firms represented outside provide substantial support for MAC's work, including conferences, allowing us to do all that we do for you. So our premier partners are Acrisure, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, CoPro Plus, Enbridge, Gallagher, Michigan County's Workers' Compensation Fund, Nationwide, Raymond. Please take a few minutes during the break to say hi to the firms with us today, and more importantly, find out how they can assist your county improving efficiency or saving county dollars. We will resume the programming here at 10:15 sharp. So you got a few minutes.